Commander Zethvar studied the tactical display with growing unease. 3 months into what should have been a swift conquest of the third planet in this unremarkable system, his forces were struggling. The word tasted bitter in his mind. The hegemony had never struggled against primitives before. "Report," he commanded, his forearms folding behind his carapace. Sub-Commander Krixtal approached, her usual confidence notably absent. "Sir, we've lost another forward base. The humans, they don't fight like any species we've encountered." Zethvar's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Elaborate. They refuse to surrender even when facing certain death. Yesterday, a single human soldier held a choke point for 6 hours against an entire battalion. When we finally breached his position, he had rigged explosives to his own body." Krixtal's voice carried an unfamiliar tremor. He smiled at us before detonating. The commander's secondary eyes narrowed. "Fear makes creatures do desperate things. Continue the psychological warfare. Protocols." But the protocols that had broken a dozen civilizations seemed to only strengthen these humans. When hegemony forces bombarded their cities, the survivors emerged from the rubble singing. When they captured human prisoners and broadcast their interrogations, the prisoners mocked their captors and recited what they called name, rank, and serial number with defiant pride. Most disturbing of all were the stories filtering back from the front lines. Stories that Zethvar had initially dismissed as battlefield hysteria, but which were becoming impossible to ignore. Trooper Vexmore had been the first to report it. His unit had cornered a group of human civilians in a collapsed metro tunnel. Standard procedure called for immediate execution, but something in the humans' behavior had unnerved him. Instead of cowering or pleading, they had formed a protective circle around their young, and the adults had begun to sing. It wasn't a war song, Vexmore had explained to the unit psychiatrist. It was gentle, beautiful. They were facing death, and they were singing lullabies to comfort their offspring. The psychiatrist had recommended combat rotation, but similar reports kept coming. Humans sharing their meager rations with wounded enemies. Human medics treating hegemony soldiers before their own wounded. Captured humans who spoke kindly to their guards and showed them pictures of their families. Zethvar had ordered enhanced interrogation protocols, expecting the humans to break under proper pressure. Instead, something else began to break. Sergeant Quindal was found in his quarters, staring at a small object clutched in his claws. When questioned, he revealed it was a crude wooden carving, a small animal the human prisoner had whittled for him before his execution. "She said it was a dog," Quindal whispered. "She said her daughter had one just like it back home. She showed me a picture." His voice cracked. "I killed her an hour later, but she gave me this first. She said she wanted me to remember that even soldiers have families who love them." The incident report disappeared into classified files, but whispers spread through the ranks. More soldiers began reporting similar encounters. A human who had shared his last meal with guards before his execution. Another who had drawn pictures of his family for his captors, speaking lovingly of his children while knowing he would never see them again. The breaking point came during the siege of what humans called New Geneva. The city had held out for weeks beyond all tactical predictions. When hegemony forces finally breached the walls, they expected to find a demoralized, defeated population. Instead, they found something that shattered the psychological foundations of everything they thought they knew about conquest. The humans had spent their final days not preparing desperate defenses or lamenting their fate, but creating. The walls were covered in art, murals depicting not scenes of war but images of beauty, love, and hope. Families had written letters to loved ones they would never see again, not filled with hatred for their conquerors, but with expressions of love and memories of joy. In the central square, they found the city's children's choir. The young humans had been organized not into a final military formation, but into neat rows where they continued to practice songs even as explosions shook the ground around them. The hegemony soldiers stood in the rubble, hardened warriors who had conquered systems across the galaxy, and they wept. Captain Rexton was the first to lay down his weapon. "I can't," he told his commanding officer. I can't kill them anymore. They're not trying to defeat us with weapons, they're defeating us with their humanity. The mutinies began that day, not violent rebellions, but quiet refusals to fight. Soldiers who had served with distinction for decades found themselves unable to pull triggers when faced with humans who met death with dignity instead of hatred. By the time Zethvar received word that 3 entire battalions had surrendered themselves to human forces, asking not for mercy, but for forgiveness, he knew the war was lost. The final transmission from High Command was brief. Immediate withdrawal, authorized. Humanity to be reclassified as protected species. Further contact prohibited. As his ship lifted away from the blue world, Zethvar found himself looking at his own reflection in the viewport. Somewhere in his quarters was a small paper crane, folded by human hands in the moments before death. The prisoner had taught him how to make it, speaking gently about hope and peace, even with execution imminent. The hegemony had tried to break humanity's spirit through overwhelming force and psychological warfare. Instead, humanity had broken something far more fundamental, the very will of their conquerors to conquer. For the first time in the galaxy's recorded history, an invasion had failed not because the defenders were too strong, but because they had made their attackers too human to continue fighting. The humans had won by refusing to stop being human.